We are looking at chapter 8 in our text, Matthew, Handbook for a Mixed Church Under Persecution. Dr. Gundry once again simply goes through the Gospel of Matthew almost verse by verse. Let's back up and look at it a little bit closer. Matthew is, of course, the author. He was one of the 12. Matthew was a publican and he was a tax collector. That's a significant aspect of this entire story. Let's look a little bit closer at the Gospel of Matthew. Papias, who made commentary on the Gospel of Mark, perhaps you remember in our last video, last chapter, Papias says that the Gospel of Matthew was not written in Greek, but was originally written in Aramaic and in Hebrew. Now that would make it unique among all the New Testament books because all the others are written in Greek. But in fact, Matthew, being the gospel that was written to the Jewish people, may well have been written in Hebrew originally and translated then into Greek. That sets it apart as a unique place, as having a unique place in the New Testament. But let's look for a moment at this individual, Matthew. Matthew was a publican. It is hard for us to understand the place that he had, but it was a despicable place in New Testament times. He was a Hebrew. He was the son of Alphaeus. In fact, an interesting side note, James the Lesser, one of the 12, is also said to be the son of Alphaeus. So it's very possible that we have another set of brothers who are in the 12. Not only Peter and Andrew, not only James and John, but also Matthew and James the Lesser. But their father was Alphaeus. By tradition and by what we understand from history, the office of a publican or a tax collector was handed down. It was a despicable place in that culture. They were sold out to the Roman government to collect taxes for Rome, for Caesar, and therefore they defrauded the Jewish people badly. So they were hated by not only the Jews, but also they were hated by the Romans because the Romans considered them to be below them. They were Jewish. And so Matthew was a man with no one on his side until Jesus came along. And then Jesus transformed him, and he became one of the 12. We don't have a whole lot about the end of Matthew's life. Tradition says that he went down into Ethiopia and died a martyr's death there. But we don't know that much about him, but there he is. He's one of the 12, and he speaks to us. It is also interesting to note that the gospel that he wrote was written to the very people he had defrauded, to the very people that had hated him the most. And so Jesus sends him back to his home to preach the gospel. The Gospel of Matthew is aimed at the Jewish people. Therefore, you find throughout it more quotations of the Old Testament than you find in any other of the Gospels. We find the Sermon on the Mount. We find the terminology of the kingdom of heaven, repeatedly emphasized throughout the Gospel of Matthew to the point that it has been called the Gospel of the Kingdom. God bless you as you study the Gospel of Matthew.